The blood on Dahlia Morgan's lip tasted like copper and shame as she stumbled into the Green River, Wyoming General Store that blistering July afternoon in 1878. Clutching the list her husband had scrawled in angry strokes across a piece of torn newspaper. She held it upside down, squinting at the marks that might as well have been chicken scratches for all the sense they made to her, and felt the familiar burn of tears threatening behind her eyes. The storekeeper was watching her with that mixture of pity and impatience she had come to know too well, and she wished the dusty floorboards would swallow her whole. "Need help with that list, madam?" The voice came from behind her, low and gentle, like wind through prairie grass. Dahlia turned to find a tall cowboy with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of strong coffee watching her, with something that looked almost like understanding rather than mockery. He was maybe 27 or 28 years old, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and hands that looked equally comfortable holding reins or a rifle. His worn leather vest bore the dust of long trails, and there was a kindness in his weathered face that made her throat tighten. "I can manage," she said quickly, her voice barely above a whisper, even though they both knew it was a lie. At 24 years old, Dahlia had spent her entire adult life hiding behind those words, pretending she could decipher the mysterious symbols that everyone else seemed to understand, as naturally as breathing. Her husband Thomas had made it clear from the first year of their marriage that her inability to read was proof of the stupidity he had always suspected lurked behind her pretty face. After 6 years of his increasingly harsh words and harder fists, she had almost started to believe him. The cowboy stepped closer, his boots making soft sounds against the wooden floor. "Name's Wyatt Olsen. I'm not trying to pry, madam, but I've got some time, and it looks like maybe you could use a hand. No shame in it." There was shame in it, though. Oceans of it, mountains of it. But her husband was waiting back at their ramshackle homestead 3 miles outside town, and if she came back with the wrong supplies again, there would be hell to pay. The bruise on her cheekbone from last week's mistake still throbbed in the summer heat. "Dahlia Morgan," she finally said, her voice catching on her own name. She held out the crumpled paper with a trembling hand, unable to meet his eyes. "I would be grateful for the help." Wyatt took the list carefully, as if it were something precious rather than a collection of angry demands written in Thomas Morgan's cramped hand. He read through it slowly, then began helping her gather the items: flour, coffee, tobacco, ammunition for Thomas's rifle, and a bottle of whiskey. Dahlia watched his capable hand selecting each item with care, noticing the way he moved with quiet efficiency, never rushing her or making her feel more foolish than she already did. "You live nearby?" he asked as the storekeeper tallied up her purchases, making marks in his ledger that Dahlia could not read to verify. 3 miles east. My husband has a homestead there." She said the word husband like it was a stone she had to spit out. Wyatt nodded slowly, his dark eyes taking in details she wished he would not notice. The fading yellow bruise on her cheekbone, the way she flinched when the storekeeper moved too quickly, the threadbare state of her calico dress despite the obvious newness of the expensive tobacco and whiskey. "I just signed on with the cattle outfit at the Triple Bar Ranch, about 5 miles north of here. I'll be around if you ever need help with anything." The offer hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Dahlia felt something flutter in her chest, some small bird of hope that she had thought Thomas had beaten out of her years ago. She nodded once, quickly, and gathered her purchases. As she loaded them into her wagon outside, she could feel Wyatt's eyes on her back, steady and thoughtful. She thought about him all the way home, about the gentle way he had handled her shame, about eyes that looked at her like she might be worth something after all. It was a dangerous thing to think about, she knew. Thomas had made it clear what he thought about her talking to other men. But still, as the wagon bounced over the rutted trail toward the small, crooked house that had never felt like home, Dahlia allowed herself to wonder what it might be like to have someone look at her the way Wyatt Olsen had, like she was a person deserving of kindness rather than an object worthy only of contempt. Thomas was waiting on the sagging porch, a half-empty bottle already in his hand, even though the sun was still high. At 41 years old, he looked a decade older, his face creased with bitterness and alcohol. He had married Dahlia when she was barely 18, fresh off a wagon train from Missouri, with her parents newly dead from cholera. She had thought she was lucky that someone wanted her at all. She had learned differently soon enough. "You take long enough," he growled as she climbed down from the wagon. "What were you doing, trying to read the labels yourself?" His laugh was mean and barking. Dahlia kept her eyes down as she carried the supplies inside, setting each item carefully on the scarred kitchen table. Thomas followed her, his boots heavy on the floorboards, and she braced herself for whatever was coming. But he seemed satisfied with the purchases this time, merely grunting his approval before taking the whiskey bottle outside to his chair. That night, lying in the darkness while Thomas snored off his drunk beside her, Dahlia thought about symbols and letters, about the mysterious way they lined up to create meaning that everyone else could access but her. Her mother had died before she could teach Dahlia more than her own name, and her father had believed that girls did not need book learning when they had hands for working. Thomas had promised to teach her once, in the early days of their marriage when he had still occasionally been kind, but that promise had curdled into mockery within months. "You're too stupid to learn," he had told her 100 times since then. "Got rocks in your head where the brains should be." She traced letters in the darkness, shapes she had memorized without understanding, and wondered if Wyatt Olsen truly meant what his offer had implied. 2 weeks passed before she saw him again. The summer heat had settled over Green River like a blanket, making even breathing feel like work. Dahlia had come to town ostensibly to trade eggs for sugar, but truthfully she needed an escape from the 4 walls of her house and Thomas's constant criticism. She was standing outside the general store, trying to appear as though she had some purpose, when Wyatt rode up on a handsome bay gelding. "Mrs. Morgan," he said, touching the brim of his hat. Up close in the bright sunlight, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the scar on his chin that looked like it had come from a knife or broken bottle. He was rugged in the way of men who worked hard for their living, but there was a gentleness in his expression that made her heartbeat quicken. "Mr. Olsen." She tried to keep her voice steady. "I meant what I said before, about helping if you needed it." He swung down from his horse, moving with the easy grace of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. "I've got the afternoon free. If you wanted, I could start teaching you. To read, I mean." Dahlia's breath caught. "I couldn't possibly. My husband doesn't have to know. There's a line shack on the old Patterson property, about halfway between town and your place. Nobody uses it anymore. I could meet you there a couple times a week. Bring a book and a slate." Wyatt's voice was matter of fact, as if he were proposing they discuss the weather, rather than something that could get them both in serious trouble. "Why would you do that for me?" The question came out before Dahlia could stop it. "You don't even know me." Wyatt was quiet for a moment, looking out across the dusty street toward the mountains that rose blue and distant in the west. "My mother couldn't read either, spent her whole life thinking she was stupid because of it. Then one winter, when I was about 12, a school teacher staying with us taught her. I saw her face the first time she read a whole sentence on her own." He turned back to Dahlia, his dark eyes serious. "Nobody should have to go through life thinking they're stupid just because nobody took the time to teach them right." Dahlia felt something crack open inside her chest, some wall she had built to protect herself from hoping for anything better. "The old Patterson place. Thursday afternoons?" "Thursday afternoons," Wyatt confirmed. "I'll be there at 2 o'clock. She watched him ride away, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. This was madness. If Thomas found out, he would beat her senseless at best. At worst, he might kill her. But the thought of continuing through life unable to read the labels on cans, unable to write a letter, unable to understand the words in books that might as well be treasure chests locked forever against her, that felt like dying slowly instead of all at once. Thursday afternoon, Dahlia told Thomas she was going to help a sick woman 3 miles west and took the wagon in that direction before circling back toward the abandoned line shack on the Patterson property. Her hands shook on the reins. She was 24 years old and about to learn to read like a child, taught by a stranger who had no reason to help her except kindness. The concept felt foreign and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Wyatt was already there when she arrived, sitting on the shack's rickety porch with a worn book and a slate board beside him. He stood when he saw her wagon approaching, and the smile that crossed his face was warm and genuine. "Wasn't sure you'd come." "Wasn't sure I would either," Dahlia admitted, climbing down. Her legs felt shaky, like she was stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. "I've never been good at learning things." "That's what someone told you," Wyatt said firmly. "Doesn't make it true." He gestured to the porch step, where he had spread out a clean blanket. "Come on, let's start with the easy part. Do you know any letters at all?" Dahlia sat down carefully, smoothing her skirt over her knees. I know D, that starts my name, and M for Morgan. Beyond that, it all just looks like marks on paper. That's a fine place to start. Wyatt settled beside her, keeping a respectful distance, but close enough that she could see the slate as he began to write. This here's an A. It's the first letter of the alphabet and one of the most common ones you'll see. For the next 2 hours, Wyatt walked her through the alphabet with a patience that made Dahlia's eyes sting. He never once made her feel foolish for not knowing what children learned by age 6. When she confused B and D, he simply showed her tricks for remembering the difference. When she struggled to form the letters on the slate with the chalk he had brought, he guided her hand gently, his calloused fingers careful against hers. You're doing real good, he said, as the afternoon shadows lengthened. Better than you think. I can tell you've got a sharp mind, Dahlia. Nobody ever gave you a fair chance to use it, that's all. The sound of her name in his mouth, spoken with respect rather than disgust, made her want to weep. She had forgotten what it felt like to be treated like a person rather than a disappointing burden. Same time next week? Wyatt asked as she prepared to leave. Same time next week, Dahlia agreed, clutching the slate he had told her to keep. And Wyatt, thank you. You can't know what this means. I think I can, he said softly, and the look in his eyes suggested he understood more than she had told him. The next Thursday, Dahlia arrived early, her heart lighter than it had been in years, despite the fresh bruises Thomas had left on her ribs the night before when she had burned his dinner. She had been practicing her letters in secret, using a stick to draw them in the dirt behind the chicken coop where Thomas never went. The alphabet was starting to make sense, the letters forming themselves into something almost familiar in her mind. Wyatt brought a children's primer this time, with simple words and pictures. Cat, he said, pointing to the letters beneath a drawing of a tabby. C-A-T sounded out with me. Ku-a-ta. Dahlia repeated the sounds, her tongue fumbling over the unfamiliar work of connecting letters to meaning. But then, suddenly, like lightning striking clear ground, it clicked. Cat, she said, her voice full of wonder. C-A-T spells cat. That's it exactly. Wyatt's grin was bright as summer sunshine. You've got it now. They worked through bat and mat and hat, then moved on to dog and hog and log. Each word Dahlia mastered felt like a small victory, a tiny piece of herself being reclaimed from the darkness Thomas had tried to bury her in. Wyatt praised each success genuinely, never condescending, always treating her like an intelligent woman who was learning a new skill rather than a stupid one who should have learned it long ago. Tell me about the Triple Bar Ranch, Dahlia said during a break, when they were sharing water from Wyatt's canteen. She wanted to know more about him, this man who was giving her back a piece of her humanity for no reason, except that it was the right thing to do. It's a good outfit. The owner, Henry Barrett, runs about 3,000 head of cattle. I'm working as a line rider mostly, checking fences and looking for strays. Pays fair, and the work's honest. Wyatt leaned back against the shack's sun-warmed boards. I grew up in Texas, moved around a lot after my folks passed. Been drifting for near about 10 years, taking work where I can find it. But I like it here, the mountains, the rivers, the way the sky goes on forever. Feels like a place a man could settle down if he found reason to. Something in the way he said those last words made Dahlia's pulse quicken. She looked away, focusing on the primer in her lap. I've never been much of anywhere. Came here from Missouri when I was 18 and married Thomas within a month. Haven't left since. You ever think about leaving? The question was casual, but Dahlia could feel the weight beneath it. Where would I go? She tried to keep the bitterness from her voice. I've got no money, no family, no skills anyone would pay for. And even if I did, Thomas would come after me. He's made that clear enough. Wyatt was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was harder, edged with something that might have been anger. A man who'd hurt a woman isn't much of a man at all. Just wants you to know that what he says about you, about your intelligence or your worth, none of that's true. You're learning faster than most folks I've known, and you've got courage it takes to keep trying when someone spent years telling you that you can't. Dahlia had to look away then, had to blink hard against the tears that threatened. Nobody had ever said such things to her before. Nobody had ever suggested that maybe Thomas was wrong and she was worth more than she had been told. The thought was dangerous and intoxicating, like whiskey on an empty stomach. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern that became the center of Dahlia's existence. Every Thursday and Sunday afternoon, when Thomas was drunk enough not to notice or care about her absence, she would take the wagon to the old Patterson line shack and meet Wyatt for her lessons. He brought different books each time, primers and readers, old newspapers, even a battered copy of a novel called Jane Eyre that he said had been his mother's favorite. With each lesson, Dahlia's world expanded. The mysterious symbols on paper began to resolve themselves into words, then sentences, then whole stories. She learned to sound out new words, to recognize common ones on sight, to understand the way punctuation shaped meaning. It was like being blind her whole life and suddenly gaining sight. Everything around her that had writing on it became something she could potentially access rather than a locked door she had no key for. But more than the reading, it was the time with Wyatt that became precious beyond measure. He talked to her like she was intelligent, asked her opinions, listened when she spoke. He told her stories about his travels, about cattle drives through Texas, about the winter he spent in Montana and nearly froze to death, about the time he broke a wild Mustang that nobody else could ride. His life seemed impossibly large and free compared to the small, suffocating confines of her existence with Thomas. And somewhere in those long summer afternoons, with grasshoppers singing in the brush and heat shimmering off the distant hills, Dahlia fell in love. It crept up on her slowly, then all at once. The way her heart would lift when she saw Wyatt's horse tied outside the shack. The way his laugh made her feel like the sun had come out from behind clouds. The way his hand would brush hers when he was showing her a word. And how that brief contact would send electricity racing through her entire body. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was absorbed in her reading, his expression tender and longing and full of things neither of them could say. By August, she could read simple sentences on her own. By September, she was working through the newspaper Wyatt brought each week, stumbling over unfamiliar words, but getting the sense of them. And by October, when the aspen leaves turned gold in the mountains and the air carried the first promise of winter, she could read 3 pages of Jane Eyre in a sitting. "I can't believe this is real," she said one afternoon, her voice choked with emotion as she finished a particularly difficult passage. "I'm actually reading real books like educated people do." "You are educated people," Wyatt said firmly. "Don't ever let anyone tell you different." He was sitting close to her now, closer than was strictly proper, their shoulders almost touching. The autumn air was cool enough that she could see her breath in small clouds. "Dahlia, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to hammer. She set the book aside and turned to look at him fully. Up close, she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could count the individual scars on his weather-beaten hands. "What is it?" "I think you know already. I think you've known for a while, same as I have." Wyatt reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair back from her face. His touch was feather-light, reverent, nothing like Thomas's rough handling. "I'm in love with you, have been since about the second lesson if I'm honest. I know you're married, I know I've got no right to feel this way, but I can't keep pretending I don't." Dahlia closed her eyes, letting herself feel the warmth of his hand against her cheek for just a moment before reality crashed back in. "I love you too," she whispered, the words tearing themselves from somewhere deep inside her. "God help me, I do, but Thomas would kill us both if he found out. He's a mean drunk and a meaner sober man. I've seen what he can do." "Then leave him, come away with me." Wyatt's voice was urgent now, both his hands cupping her face. "We could go to California or up to Montana, somewhere he'd never find us. I've got money saved. We could start over." "I can't just leave. He's my husband in the eyes of the law and the church. And even if I did run, he would come after me. He'd never let me go. Not because he loves me, but because I'm his property, and he doesn't let go of what's his." Dahlia pulled back, wrapping her arms around herself. The truth was as cold and heavy as a stone. "We can't do this, Wyatt. These lessons, they've been the best thing in my life, but we have to stop before someone gets hurt." "You're already hurt," Wyatt said quietly, his eyes on the bruises that were visible at her collar. "How much worse does it have to get before you let someone help you?" She had no answer for that. They sat in silence for a long time, the space between them crackling with everything they could not do, could not have. Finally, as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Dahlia stood to leave. "Same time Thursday?" Wyatt asked, his voice rough. She should have said no. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to end this now, before feelings that were already deep became something neither of them could control. But the thought of giving up these afternoons, of returning completely to the gray emptiness of her life with Thomas, was more than she could bear. Same time Thursday, she agreed, and tried not to see the relief and pain that warred across Wyatt's face. The first snow came in early November, unusual for Green River, but not unheard of. Dahlia met Wyatt at the line shack despite the cold, wrapped in her thin coat and shivering. He had built a small fire in the shack's ancient stove, and the interior was marginally warmer than outside, though their breath still misted in the air. "Here," Wyatt said, immediately shrugging out of his heavy sheepskin jacket and draping it around her shoulders. It was warm from his body and smelled like leather and sage and something indefinably him. Dahlia wanted to bury her face in it and never let go. "You'll freeze," she protested weakly. "I'm fine. Been through worse winters than this." Wyatt settled beside her, rubbing his hands together. "Now, where did we leave off last time? I think you were on chapter 12. But Dahlia could not concentrate on reading that day. The events of the morning kept playing through her mind, making the words swim on the page. Thomas had found her practicing letters in the dirt and had beaten her badly, worse than usual, calling her a stupid, worthless fool who was wasting time on things too complicated for her feeble brain. The bruises under her dress throbbed with each breath. "What's wrong?" Wyatt asked after she had stared at the same sentence for 5 minutes without really seeing it. "Everything," she wanted to say. "My whole life is wrong." Instead, she just shook her head. "Nothing, I'm fine. Don't lie to me, Dahlia, please." His voice was so gentle it broke something inside her. What did he do this time? The story came pouring out then, all of it. 6 years of casual cruelty and mounting violence. The way Thomas had isolated her, making sure she had no friends, no connections, no way to support herself if she tried to leave. The way he controlled every penny that came into the house, never giving her enough even for necessities. The way he told her daily that she was ugly, stupid, worthless, until she could hear his voice in her own head. Wyatt listened without interrupting, his jaw getting tighter and tighter, until she could see the muscle jumping in his cheek. When she finally fell silent, he said, "You can't go back there. I don't have a choice." "There's always a choice." Wyatt took her hands in his grip warm and strong. "Marry me, leave him and marry me. I'll protect you." "I'm already married," Dahlia said, even as her heart soared at his words. "Divorce is near impossible, especially for a woman, and even if I could get one, Thomas would never agree to it. Then we'll go somewhere he can't find us, change our names, head west to California where nobody knows us, and start fresh." Wyatt's eyes were blazing with intensity now. "I'm not a rich man, Dahlia, but I'm a hard worker. I'll provide for you, keep you safe, spend the rest of my life making sure nobody ever hurts you or makes you feel small again." It was the most beautiful offer anyone had ever made her, and it was impossible. Dahlia pulled her hands from his, standing up and moving to the shack's small, dirty window. "It's a fantasy. We'd be looking over our shoulders forever, and I won't make you a fugitive for helping me. That's my choice to make." Wyatt stood too, coming to stand behind her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the heat of him. "Dahlia, I know we've only known each other a few months. I know this is fast, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you. I love your courage and your kindness and the way your whole face lights up when you figure out a new word. I love that you kept trying to learn, even when someone told you that you were too stupid, because that proves you're smarter and stronger than he could ever be. Let me love you properly. Let me give you the life you deserve." Dahlia turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. "I love you too. So much it scares me, but I can't ask you to risk your life for me." "You're not asking. I'm offering." Wyatt wiped her tears away with his thumbs, his touch achingly tender. "Say yes, Dahlia. Say you'll come away with me." She knew she should refuse. The sensible thing, the safe thing, was to keep her head down and endure until Thomas drank himself to death, or found some other way to get himself killed. But standing there in that tiny shack with snow beginning to fall outside, and Wyatt looking at her like she hung the stars, Dahlia found she was tired of being sensible, tired of being safe, tired of enduring. "Yes," she whispered, "yes, I'll come with you." Wyatt kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something precious that might break. It was nothing like the rough, demanding kisses Thomas had taken from her. This was a question and an answer all at once, a promise sealed with the meeting of lips. Dahlia kissed him back, pouring all her fear and hope and love into that single moment, and felt alive for the first time in 6 years. They spent the next 2 weeks planning in secret, stolen hours that felt stolen from another life. Wyatt would collect his pay from the Triple Bar Ranch and buy supplies for the journey. Dahlia would gather what few possessions she could not bear to leave: her mother's wedding ring, a photograph of her parents, the primer and slate Wyatt had given her. They would leave on a Sunday morning when Thomas would be sleeping off Saturday night's drinking, taking Dahlia's wagon and Wyatt's horse, and heading west toward the Utah Territory. "We'll get married proper once we're far enough away," Wyatt promised during one of their last lessons. "Make it legal as soon as we can. I want to do right by you, Dahlia." "You already have," she said, touching his face with wonder, still fresh despite weeks of stolen moments. "You gave me back my mind, my self-respect. That's worth more than I can say." The night before they were supposed to leave, Dahlia could barely sleep. She lay beside Thomas in their bed, listening to his heavy snoring and thinking about the life waiting for her on the other side of dawn. A life where she could read books, learn new things, maybe even write letters of her own someday. A life with a man who saw her intelligence rather than mocking it, who wanted to build her up rather than tear her down. A life that was hers to choose rather than one forced upon her by circumstance and desperation. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. She woke to Thomas standing over her in the gray pre-dawn light, his face twisted with rage and his hand wrapped around her throat. "Thought I was too drunk to notice you practicing your letters behind the coop, did you? Thought I wouldn't figure out you'd been sneaking off to see some man?" His breath was hot and rank with whiskey. "Who is he? Who's the man been filling your stupid head with ideas above your station?" Dahlia could not speak, could not breathe. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. She clawed at Thomas's hands, but he was much stronger, fueled by years of anger and alcohol-soaked rage. This was it, she realized with strange clarity. This was how she was going to die, strangled in the bed she had shared with a man she had never loved, just hours before she was supposed to escape to freedom. Then the pressure on her throat released suddenly. Thomas made a choking sound and stumbled backward. Dahlia gasped for air, her vision clearing slowly. Through the tears and confusion, she saw Wyatt standing in the bedroom doorway, his pistol leveled at Thomas's head. "Step away from her," Wyatt said, his voice cold and deadly calm. "Do it now, or I swear to God I'll end you right here." Thomas's hand went to his own gun belt, hanging on the bedpost, but Wyatt was faster. He fired once, the shot deafening in the small room, and Thomas's gun belt exploded in a shower of leather and metal. The second shot went into the floor near Thomas's feet. "Next one goes in you," Wyatt promised. "I'm a real good shot, Morgan. Spent 3 years as a sharpshooter in the cavalry. I don't miss." "This is my house, my wife," Thomas snarled, but he had gone pale. "You got no right. She's a person, not property, and any man who'd strangle a woman half his size has got no rights worth respecting." Wyatt gestured with the gun. "Dahlia, get your things. We're leaving." Dahlia scrambled from the bed, her hands shaking so badly she could barely function. She grabbed the small bag she had hidden under a loose floorboard, the one containing her treasures and a change of clothes. Her throat felt crushed, each breath painful, but she was alive. She was leaving. "You won't get away with this," Thomas said as Wyatt backed toward the door, keeping his gun trained on the older man. "I'll find you. I'll kill you both." "You're welcome to try," Wyatt said evenly. "But I'd suggest you think real hard about whether tracking us is worth dying over, because that's what'll happen if you come after her. I'll protect Dahlia with my last breath, and I'm a hell of a lot better with a gun than you are." They ran then, out into the cold November dawn. Wyatt's horse was already saddled, the wagon ready to go. He lifted Dahlia onto the wagon seat, then tied his gelding to the back and climbed up beside her. His hands were steady on the reins as they raced down the rutted trail toward the main road. But Dahlia could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept checking behind them for pursuit. "I'm sorry," she managed to croak out, her damaged throat making her voice sound strange and raw. "I'm sorry you had to do that. If he reports it to the sheriff, let him," Wyatt said grimly. "Henry Barrett, my boss, he's a friend of the sheriff. Between my word and yours about what Thomas was doing to you when I arrived, It'll go nowhere. But we're still leaving. I don't trust a man like that not to come after you anyway, law or no law." They rode hard for 2 days, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and grab fitful sleep. Wyatt was different now, harder, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon for threats. At night, he slept with his gun in his hand, positioned between Dahlia and the direction they had come from. She could see the warrior in him now, the man who had survived on his own for a decade through strength and skill and sheer determination. But he was still gentle with her. When she needed to rest, he found safe places. When she was cold, he wrapped her in blankets and built fires. When her throat hurt too badly to speak, he talked enough for both of them, his voice a soothing constant in the uncertain darkness. And when she finally broke down sobbing on the third night, overwhelmed by everything that had happened, he held her carefully and let her cry herself out against his chest. "You're safe now," he murmured into her hair. "I've got you. Nobody's going to hurt you again." They crossed into the Utah Territory a week later, the landscape transforming into red rock canyons and stretching desert vistas. In a small town called Price, they found a hotel that did not ask too many questions. Wyatt got them separate rooms, keeping everything proper, even though they both knew their reputations were already ruined by traveling together. "We need to stay here for a while," Wyatt said that evening over dinner in the hotel's modest restaurant. "Let things cool down back in Wyoming. Give Thomas time to either come after us so I can deal with him once and for all, or give up and move on." "You really think he'd give up?" Dahlia could speak normally again now, her throat healing. But she still had nightmares about Thomas's hands crushing her windpipe, about dying on that filthy floor without ever seeing the sun again. "Men like him are cowards at heart. He went after you because you couldn't fight back. He won't want to face someone who can and will." Wyatt's expression was grim. "But we'll be ready either way. I'm teaching you to shoot." So began another education, different from the first, but no less important. Every afternoon, Wyatt took Dahlia out into the desert beyond Price and taught her to handle his spare revolver. She learned to load it, aim it, fire it, clean it. Her hands, so recently learned to form letters, now learned to form a defense. It felt strange and powerful, holding a weapon that could kill, knowing she would use it if Thomas ever cornered her again. "You're a natural," Wyatt said after 2 weeks of practice, watching her put 3 shots into the center of the target he had made from an old crate. "Good eye, steady hand, don't know why I'm surprised. You've been proving you can learn anything since the day I met you." In the evenings, after shooting practice, they continued her reading lessons. Dahlia was progressing rapidly now, reading full chapters from Jane Eyre, and even starting a journal where she practiced writing her thoughts. Seeing her own words on paper felt like magic, like conjuring something from nothing. She wrote about the desert, about learning to shoot, about Wyatt, especially about Wyatt and the way he made her feel like a person worth being. It was December when Thomas finally caught up to them. Dahlia had been in town buying supplies, her mind half on the grocery list. Wyatt had helped her write out that morning. She was thinking about how far she had come, from the woman who could not read her own husband's angry scrawl to someone who wrote shopping lists and kept a journal. She was thinking about how happy she had been these past weeks, living in a state of temporary uncertainty, but feeling more free than she ever had in her marriage. She was not paying attention to her surroundings the way Wyatt had taught her, so she did not see Thomas until he grabbed her arm in an alley between the general store and the livery stable, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. He looked terrible, gaunt and wild-eyed, his clothes filthy from hard travel. But his grip was still strong, and the knife he pressed against her ribs was very sharp. "Thought you could run from me, did you?" he hissed in her ear. "Thought you could make me look like a fool, leaving with some drifter cowboy? You're my wife, Dahlia. You belong to me." Terror froze her for a moment, making her stupid and slow. This was the nightmare she had been having, Thomas finding her and dragging her back to that life of gray misery and slow death. But then she remembered the weight of the small pistol in her skirt pocket, the one Wyatt had insisted she carry everywhere. She remembered 2 weeks of target practice, of learning to be strong rather than helpless. "I don't belong to anyone anymore," she said, and shot him through the pocket of her dress. Thomas made a sound of shock and pain, stumbling backward. The knife clattered to the ground. Dahlia stepped back, pulling the smoking pistol free and aiming it at him with both hands, just like Wyatt had taught her. Her hands were steady even though her heart was racing. Thomas clutched his side, blood seeping through his fingers, his face twisted with disbelief and rage. "You shot me," he gasped. "You stupid—" "I'm not stupid," Dahlia said clearly. "I never was. You just needed me to think I was so you could feel bigger. But I'm done with that now. I'm done with you." People were gathering now, drawn by the gunshot. Wyatt came running from the hotel, his own gun drawn, but he stopped short when he saw Dahlia standing over Thomas with the pistol still raised. Pride and concern warred on his face. "He came at me with a knife," Dahlia said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "He's my husband, and he came to drag me back to Wyoming. I shot him in self-defense." The town doctor pushed through the crowd, kneeling beside Thomas. The wound was not fatal, Dahlia realized, with a mixture of relief and disappointment. The bullet had caught him in the side, missing anything vital. He would live, unfortunately, but at least she had not killed him. That was something. The sheriff arrived next, a weathered man in his 50s who listened to Dahlia's story with a neutral expression. She showed him the bruises on her throat, still visible weeks later, and the fresh ones on her arm where Thomas had grabbed her. Witnesses confirmed they had seen Thomas attack her first, seen the knife. In the end, the sheriff arrested Thomas for assault with a deadly weapon and let Dahlia go with a warning to stay in town until the matter was settled. "You did good," Wyatt told her later, back in her hotel room with the door properly open and the hotel owner's wife serving as a chaperone. "I'm sorry you had to do that, but you protected yourself. That took real courage." Dahlia looked down at her hands, still slightly powder-stained from the gunshot. She had shot her husband. The full weight of it was starting to sink in now that the immediate danger had passed. She was shaking, but underneath the fear was something else: satisfaction. She had fought back. After 6 years of taking whatever Thomas dished out, she had finally fought back. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we wait for the law to sort itself out. Then we go on with our plans." Wyatt smiled at her, his eyes warm despite the day's violence. "Nothing's changed, Dahlia. I still want you with me. Still want to marry you proper when we can. Still want to spend every day teaching you new things and learning who you really are when nobody's telling you that you're less than you are." Thomas ended up serving 6 months in the territorial prison for assault. During that time, Dahlia stayed in Price, taking work as a laundress to pay her way and continuing her lessons with Wyatt. By the time spring came around again, she could read almost anything put in front of her and was working on improving her writing. She read 3 more novels cover to cover, subscribed to a newspaper, and began to understand just how much of the world had been closed off to her through illiteracy. More than that, she and Wyatt courted properly, with all the sweet awkwardness of young people falling in love. They took walks through the desert in the cool evenings, with Wyatt pointing out constellations and telling her their names. They attended church on Sundays, sitting together in the back pew. They had dinner at the hotel restaurant, talking for hours about everything and nothing, and slowly, carefully, Dahlia learned what it meant to be loved by a good man. "I want to divorce him," she told Wyatt one evening in April, as they sat on the hotel porch watching the sun set over the red rocks. "I know it's hard and expensive, but I want to do it proper. I don't want to spend my life looking over my shoulder or hiding who I am." "Then we'll do it proper," Wyatt agreed. "I've been saving money from my ranch work. We'll get you a lawyer, file the papers. Between the assault charge and what he did to you all those years, I think we've got a case. It won't be quick, but we'll see it through." The divorce took 8 months and most of Wyatt's savings, but in the end, the judge granted it on grounds of extreme cruelty and assault. Thomas contested it viciously from prison, but he had no money for a good lawyer and too many witnesses to his violence. When the final decree came through in December of 1879, Dahlia sat in the courthouse and cried, clutching the paper that said she was no longer Thomas Morgan's property. She and Wyatt were married 3 days later in a small ceremony at the Price Methodist Church, with half the town in attendance. Dahlia wore a simple blue dress she had sewn herself, and Wyatt wore his best suit, his hair slicked back and his boots polished to a shine. When the minister asked if she would take Wyatt Olsen as her husband, Dahlia's voice rang out clear and strong with her yes. "I promise to love you, teach you, and support you all the days of my life," Wyatt said during the vows, taking her hands in his. "I promise to always see you as the intelligent, courageous woman you are, and I promise that you'll never have to be afraid again." "I promise to love you for giving me back myself," Dahlia responded, her own vows prepared and memorized. I promise to keep learning and growing and becoming whoever I'm meant to be. And I promise that I'll spend the rest of my life showing you that your faith in me was not misplaced." They kissed as husband and wife while the congregation applauded, and Dahlia felt like she had been reborn. At 25 years old, she was finally beginning her real life. They stayed in Price for another year, while Wyatt worked at a nearby ranch and Dahlia took in sewing and laundry. She read voraciously now, working her way through every book she could borrow or buy. She practiced her writing until it was clear and confident, then started writing letters to the local newspaper about women's education and the importance of literacy. The editor published 2 of them, and Dahlia kept those clipped articles like treasures. In the spring of 1881, Wyatt came home with news. "Henry Barrett, my old boss from Wyoming, he's sold the Triple Bar and moved down to northern Arizona territory. He's starting a new ranch near a town called Prescott and wants me to come on as foreman. Good pay, better than I'm making here. A house comes with the job." He looked at Dahlia hopefully. "What do you think? Should we take a chance on Arizona?" Dahlia thought about it carefully. She had grown to love Price, had made friends here, had built a small life. But she trusted Wyatt completely, trusted his judgment and his dreams. "If you think it's the right move, then let's go. I'm not afraid of starting over. I've done it before." So, they packed up their modest possessions and headed south to Arizona, where the desert was even more spectacular than Utah's, and the opportunities seemed limitless. The ranch was beautiful, nestled in a valley with mountains rising on all sides and a creek running through it year-round. Their house was small but solid, with glass windows and a real wood floor. It felt like a palace compared to the house she had shared with Thomas. Wyatt threw himself into his work, proving that Henry Barrett's faith in him was well-founded. Under his management, the ranch prospered, expanding from 500 head to over 2,000 in 3 years. He was fair with the ranch hands, smart about breeding and grazing, and respected by everyone who worked with him. And every evening, no matter how tired he was, he came home to Dahlia with a smile and asked about her day. Dahlia had found her own purpose in Prescott. Learning about her experiences, several women had approached her quietly, admitting they also could not read. She began teaching them, holding classes twice a week in the church basement. Some were young wives like she had been, kept ignorant by husbands who preferred them that way. Others were older women who had simply never had the opportunity to learn. Watching them discover reading the way she had, seeing their faces light up with the same wonder she had felt, became the most fulfilling work Dahlia had ever done. "You're doing something important," Wyatt told her one evening as she was preparing lessons for the next day's class. "Changing lives. I'm so proud of you." Dahlia looked up at him, this man who had seen value in her when she had seen none in herself, who had risked everything to save her, who loved her more than she had ever imagined being loved. "I couldn't have done any of it without you. You saved my life, Wyatt. In every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," he said, pulling her into his arms. "You gave me a reason to stop drifting, a reason to build something lasting. Before you, I was just moving from place to place, never putting down roots. Now I've got a home, a real one, because you're in it." Their first child, a son they named James, was born in the spring of 1883 during a thunderstorm that shook the house and turned the valley green. Wyatt paced the porch while the midwife attended Dahlia, his face pale with worry. When he finally heard the baby's cry, he burst through the door to find Dahlia, exhausted but smiling, holding a squalling, red-faced infant. "A boy," she said softly. "We have a son, Wyatt." He came to kneel beside the bed, touching the baby's tiny hand with wonder. "He's perfect. You're perfect." His voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you, Dahlia, for him, for everything, for taking a chance on me." "Always," she promised, watching her husband fall in love with their son in real time, "for the rest of our lives." James was followed by a daughter, Grace, 2 years later, then another son, Samuel, 2 years after that. The house filled with the sound of children's laughter, with books and learning and love. Dahlia taught all 3 children to read as soon as they were old enough, making sure they would never know the shame and helplessness she had endured. And Wyatt proved to be the kind of father she had always hoped existed, but never truly believed in, patient and present and proud of his children's accomplishments. Her literacy classes grew too, eventually moving from the church basement to a dedicated schoolhouse that Wyatt helped build with his own hands. Women came from all over the county to learn, and Dahlia hired 2 other teachers to help manage the demand. The school became known throughout northern Arizona territory as a place where women could better themselves without judgment, where illiteracy was treated as a fixable problem rather than a moral failing. One evening in 1889, 11 years after that first meeting in the Green River General Store, Dahlia sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. Grace and Samuel were playing in the yard, while James, now 6 years old, read from a book in the chair beside her. Wyatt was riding in from the range, his silhouette familiar and beloved against the darkening sky. "Mama, I finished the whole chapter," James said proudly, holding up his reader. "Want to hear me read it?" "I would love that," Dahlia said, stroking his dark hair that was so like his father's. She still marveled sometimes at the miracle of it all, at how completely her life had transformed. She was 31 years old, educated and respected, surrounded by children who would never know what it was like to feel stupid or worthless. She taught 20 women to read each week and was known throughout the territory for her work. She lived in a home filled with books and love, married to a man who still looked at her like she hung the moon. Wyatt dismounted and climbed the porch steps, pausing to kiss Dahlia's forehead before settling into the chair beside her. James immediately began reading his chapter, his young voice careful and proud. When he finished, both his parents applauded. "That was excellent," Wyatt said. "Your mama was just about your age when she learned to read, you know. And now, look at her, teaching dozens of other folks." "Really?" James looked at Dahlia with surprise. "But you're the smartest person I know, Mama." "I am now," Dahlia said, meeting Wyatt's eyes over their son's head. "But I had a good teacher, someone who believed in me when I did not believe in myself." After the children were asleep that night, Dahlia and Wyatt sat together on the porch in the cool desert evening, her head on his shoulder and his arm around her waist. The stars were brilliant overhead, countless and close in the clear Arizona air. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't walked into that store that day?" Wyatt asked quietly. "If I hadn't offered to help?" Dahlia considered it honestly. "I think Thomas would have killed me eventually, or I would have killed myself, one way or another. I was drowning, Wyatt. You threw me a rope." "You grabbed it," he countered. "You did the hard work of learning, of building a new life, of fighting back when you had to. I just gave you a chance. You're the one who took it and ran with it." "We did it together," Dahlia said, which felt like the truest statement of all. "And we built something beautiful." She thought about the years ahead, about watching their children grow up literate and confident, about continuing her teaching work, about growing old beside this man who had seen her at her lowest and loved her anyway. There would be challenges still, she knew. Thomas had died in prison 2 years ago, but there were other men like him in the world, other women who needed help escaping. There was work to be done, but sitting there in the darkness with Wyatt's heartbeat steady under her ear and the sounds of her children sleeping safely inside, Dahlia knew she had everything she needed. She had fought her way from helplessness to strength, from shame to pride, from a life half-lived to one fully embraced. And she had done it one letter at a time, with a cowboy who had taught her to read and then to love and finally to believe in herself. "I'm going to write a book," she said suddenly, the idea forming as she spoke, "about learning to read as an adult, about what it's like to have that part of the world closed off to you, then opened up. Maybe it'll help other women see that it's never too late to learn." Wyatt pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her hair. "That's a wonderful idea. I'll help however I can. Edit it, find a publisher, whatever you need. Just believe in me," Dahlia said. "The way you have from the start. That's all I need." "Always," Wyatt promised, "for the rest of our lives." And he kept that promise. Through the years that followed, through the publication of Dahlia's book and the expansion of her school, through raising 3 children who grew up knowing their mother was brilliant and their father was honorable, through building a ranch that became known throughout the territory for its fair treatment of workers and quality livestock. Through everything, Wyatt believed in her. They grew old together in that house in Arizona, surrounded by grandchildren who all learned to read almost as soon as they could walk. Dahlia's literacy school expanded to serve men as well as women, becoming a full adult education center that offered classes in reading, writing, mathematics, and practical skills. Her book, titled Never Too Late, One Woman's Journey to Literacy, was published by a press in San Francisco and sold modestly but steadily, reaching women across the West, who saw their own struggles reflected in her words. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1899, Wyatt gave Dahlia a leather-bound journal with her name embossed in gold on the cover. Inside the front page, in his careful handwriting, he had written, "To my brilliant wife, who proves every day that intelligence comes not from what you know, when you start, but from your willingness to keep learning. All my love, always. Wyatt." Dahlia ran her fingers over the words, reading them easily now, though they still made her throat tight with emotion. "Do you remember that first day in the general store, when I was holding that list upside down and trying to pretend I knew what it said? I remember thinking you were the prettiest woman I'd ever seen, and the saddest," Wyatt said, sitting beside her on their porch swing. "I remember wanting to help you, though I didn't know then that helping you would end up being the best thing I ever did for myself." "My husband said I was too stupid to learn," Dahlia said softly. The words that had haunted her for so many years, finally defanged by time and love, and proof that they had never been true. "But you taught me to read every night until I could do it on my own. You gave me myself back, Wyatt. Everything good in my life started the day you offered to help me in that store." "Everything good in my life started when you said yes," Wyatt countered, pulling her close. "When you trusted me enough to try, when you were brave enough to leave and build something new. I'm just the man lucky enough to be part of your story." They sat together in the gathering dusk, the desert wind carrying the scent of sage and the distant sound of cattle lowing. Inside the house, their daughter Grace was preparing dinner, her own children setting the table and arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to wash dishes. The school Dahlia had founded would be celebrating its 15th anniversary next month, with over 300 graduates now able to read and write because of her work. It was an ordinary evening in an ordinary week of an extraordinary life, and Dahlia had never been more grateful for any of it. She had started with nothing but shame and ignorance, had been told she was too stupid to learn, too worthless to matter, and she had ended up here, educated, respected, surrounded by love and family and work that mattered. All because a cowboy with kind eyes had offered to help her read a shopping list one hot summer day in Wyoming. "Read to me?" Wyatt asked, handing her the newspaper that had been delivered that morning. It was a request he made often, never tiring of hearing her voice-shape words on a page. Dahlia opened the paper and began to read, her voice clear and confident. The words flowed easily now, no longer mysterious symbols, but tools she could wield with skill. As she read, Wyatt listened with his eyes closed and a small smile on his weathered face, content in the way of a man who has found exactly where he belongs. Outside, the stars were coming out one by one, brilliant against the darkening sky. Coyotes called in the distance, their voices wild and free. The desert held its breath in that moment between day and night, and in a small house in Arizona territory, two people who had saved each other sat together in the peace they had built from determination and love. Dahlia finished the article and set the paper aside, leaning into Wyatt's warmth. "Do you know what I'm most grateful for?" she asked. "Not just that you taught me to read, though that changed everything, but that you taught me I was worth teaching. That was the bigger gift." "You always were worth it," Wyatt said. "I just made sure you knew it too." Their grandchildren began arriving then, 3 of them tumbling out the door in a cascade of noise and energy, begging Grandma to read them a story before bed. Dahlia laughed and stood, choosing a book from the collection on the porch shelf. She settled into the big chair with children draped across her lap and began to read, her voice bringing the story to life. Wyatt watched from the swing, his heart full to bursting. This was what he had dreamed of during those long years of drifting, without knowing exactly what shape it would take. A home full of love, children and grandchildren who knew they were valued, a wife who was his partner in every way. He had found it all by offering to help a frightened woman read a shopping list, and he would never stop being grateful for the courage it had taken her to accept that help. Later, after the grandchildren had been put to bed in the spare room and Grace had left with her family, Dahlia and Wyatt prepared for sleep in the bedroom they had shared for 20 years. Dahlia sat at her dressing table, brushing out her hair, and caught Wyatt's reflection in the mirror, watching her with the same tender expression he had worn on their wedding night. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, meeting his eyes in the glass. "Just that I'm the luckiest man alive," he said simply, "and that I'd do it all again, every single moment, to end up right here with you." Dahlia set down her brush and went to him, wrapping her arms around his neck. The luck was all mine, Cowboy. You rode into my life and changed everything. Taught me that I was worth teaching, worth loving, worth saving. I was drowning in shame and ignorance, and you pulled me into the light. We pulled each other, Wyatt said, kissing her softly. That's what love is, I think. Seeing the best in someone and helping them see it too. You taught me that life is richer when you share it, that putting down roots is better than drifting. We're even, Dahlia. We'll always be even. They held each other in the quiet of their bedroom, surrounded by the life they had built from nothing but determination and faith in each other. Outside, an owl called in the darkness. The clock on the mantel chimed 10. The whole world kept turning, indifferent to individual lives and loves. But inside that small house, two people had found everything that mattered. In the years that followed, they watched their children grow into capable adults. James took over as foreman when Wyatt's arthritis made it hard to ride all day, managing the ranch with the same fair-handed skill his father had shown. Grace became a teacher herself, running Dahlia's literacy school and expanding it to include classes for children whose families could not afford regular school. Samuel became a lawyer, dedicating himself to helping women escape bad marriages and fighting for better property rights. "Look at what we made," Dahlia said to Wyatt on their 30th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren at a celebration that filled their house to bursting. "Look at all the good that came from one cowboy deciding to help a woman who could not read. Look at all the good that came from one woman deciding she was worth more than she had been told," Wyatt countered. "You're the miracle here, Dahlia. Always have been." She kissed him then, in front of God and their family, and everyone. A kiss that held 30 years of love and gratitude and partnership. The grandchildren whooped and hollered, embarrassed and delighted in equal measure. James raised a glass to toast his parents. Grace dabbed at her eyes. Samuel grinned and shook his head at the display of affection. "To Mama and Papa," James said loudly, "who proved that love and determination can overcome anything, who taught us that it's never too late to learn and never wrong to help someone who needs it. May we all be as lucky as they've been." "To Mama and Papa," the room chorused, and Dahlia felt her eyes fill with happy tears. The years continued to pass, as they always do. The new century arrived with fireworks and celebration, bringing automobiles and electric lights and all manner of changes to the modern world. Dahlia and Wyatt watched it all from their porch in Arizona, amazed at how much the world had transformed since that summer day in 1878 when they had first met. "Remember when the fastest way to travel was by horse or train?" Wyatt said one evening, watching an automobile chug past on the road that now ran near their property. "Now, folks are talking about flying machines." "I remember when I thought reading was impossible," Dahlia said. "Now I've read hundreds of books and taught hundreds of women. The world changes. People change. That's not always a bad thing." Wyatt took her hand. The gesture as natural now, as breathing after decades of marriage. His hair was white now, his face deeply lined, but his eyes still held the same warmth they had shown that first day. "Best change I ever made was stopping to help you. Best decision you ever made was letting me. Best decision I ever made was falling in love with you," Dahlia corrected. "The reading was wonderful, but the love was everything." They celebrated their 40th anniversary in 1919, surrounded by a family that now included 7 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. Dahlia was 65 years old, still teaching literacy classes twice a week and working on a second book. Wyatt was 68, retired from active ranch work but still consulting with James on major decisions. They were old now, their bodies showing the wear of long lives fully lived, but the love between them had only grown stronger with time. 40 years, Wyatt said wonderingly, holding Dahlia close as they danced slowly to music from Grace's new gramophone. "Feels like yesterday and forever all at once." "Feels like exactly the right amount of time," Dahlia said, resting her head on his shoulder. "With exactly the right person." That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, they lay together in their bed and talked about the past, something they did more often now that they had so much of it to look back on. "Do you ever regret it?" Dahlia asked. "Taking on someone else's wife? All the trouble that caused?" "Never," Wyatt said immediately. "Not for one single second. You were never really his, Dahlia. You were always meant to be mine, and I was always meant to be yours. We just had to find each other first. And now we'll never be apart," she said, which was both a statement of fact and a fervent wish. She could not imagine a world without Wyatt in it, could not conceive of going on without his steady presence beside her. Never, he agreed, holding her closer. In this life and whatever comes after. You're stuck with me forever, Mrs. Olsen. Good, Dahlia whispered. That's exactly how long I want you. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and did not wake. When James came by the next morning to check on them as he did every day, he found his parents together in their bed, their faces peaceful and their hands intertwined. The doctor said their hearts had simply stopped in the night, first one and then the other, no more than moments apart. They couldn't bear to be separated, Grace said at the funeral, tears streaming down her face, not even by death. The whole territory came to pay their respects. The church could not hold everyone who wanted to attend, so the service was moved outdoors, with hundreds of people gathered to honor the couple who had touched so many lives. Former students of Dahlia's spoke about how she had changed their lives, given them access to a world they thought was forever closed. Ranch hands told stories about Wyatt's fairness and kindness, about how he had treated everyone with respect, regardless of their station. But it was Samuel who gave the eulogy that captured who they really were. My father once told me that he had been drifting aimlessly until he met my mother, he said, his lawyer's voice carrying clearly over the assembled crowd. And my mother told me that she had been drowning in shame and ignorance until my father threw her a rope. They saved each other, those two. And in doing so, they saved dozens, maybe hundreds of others. Everyone my mother taught to read, everyone my father treated with dignity and fairness, everyone who saw their love and believed that goodness was possible in this hard world. My parents' legacy is not just their children and grandchildren, though we are considerable in number. Gentle laughter rippled through the crowd. Their legacy is the belief that it is never too late to learn, never wrong to help, and never foolish to have faith and love. They were buried together in the Prescott Cemetery, under a large granite stone that bore both their names and the dates that bracketed their lives. But their real memorial was the school Dahlia had founded, which continued operating under Grace's leadership. It was the ranch that James and his sons would run for another 50 years. It was the hundreds of women who could now read because Dahlia had first learned herself, then turned around and taught others. It was the ripples of goodness spreading out from one act of kindness on a hot summer day in 1878. Years after their deaths, elderly women would still come to the school and tell stories about Mrs. Olsen, who had taught them to read when they thought they were too old or too stupid. She never made you feel ashamed, they would say. She just made you believe you could do it, and then you could. And sometimes, on summer evenings, people swore they could see two figures on the porch of the old ranch house that James and his family still occupied. A tall man with a weathered face and a woman with kind eyes, sitting close together the way they always had, surrounded by the love they had built and protected against all odds. The story of Dahlia and Wyatt became legend in Prescott, passed down through generations as proof that love could transform lives, that learning was never impossible, and that sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was accept help when it was offered and believe they deserved better than what they had been given. Children learned about them in school. The Literacy Center was renamed the Dahlia Olsen Institute in 1925, with a plaque outside bearing her most famous quote, "I was told I was too stupid to learn, but the truth was that I had never been taught." There is a world of difference between those two things, and understanding it can change everything. The Wild West they had lived in was long gone by then, transformed into something modern and paved and civilized. But the values they had embodied, the love they had shared, the example they had set, those things remained. Those things mattered. A cowboy had taught a woman to read, and in doing so had taught her to believe in herself. And she had taught him that settling down was better than drifting, that love was worth fighting for, that together they could build something lasting. It was a simple story in the end. Two people finding each other in a hard world and deciding that together they were stronger than apart. Two people who took a chance on love when the odds were stacked against them. Two people who proved that transformation was always possible, that learning was never too late, and that genuine love, the kind that sees and honors the best in both people, could overcome almost any obstacle. The barn at the Triple Bar had burned down that day Dahlia shot Thomas, a coincidence that seemed meaningful somehow, like the old life literally going up in flames to make way for the new. The Patterson Line Shack, where they had held those first lessons, eventually collapsed in a storm, but a historical marker was placed on the site in 1935, commemorating it as the place where Dahlia Morgan Olsen had learned to read and begun the journey that would touch thousands of lives. And if visitors to that marker sometimes reported feeling a sense of peace there, of love lingering in the air like perfume, well, perhaps that was just their imagination. Or perhaps some loves are strong enough to echo through time, leaving traces that never quite fade. The kind of love that sees someone at their worst and helps them become their best. The kind that teaches and learns in equal measure. The kind that begins with offering to help a stranger read a shopping list and ends with two lives completely transformed. That was the love Dahlia and Wyatt had found together. The kind that lasted not just until death, but beyond it, woven into the land and the legends and the lives of everyone they touched. And every time a woman opened a book and read words that had once been mysterious to her, every time someone decided they were worth more than they had been told, every time kindness triumphed over cruelty, Dahlia and Wyatt's love lived on. In the end, that was the real story. Not just that a cowboy taught a woman to read, though he did. Not just that they fell in love despite impossible obstacles, though they did. But that their love became something larger than themselves, a force for good that rippled outward through time, changing lives and proving that education and compassion and genuine love could transform the world one person at a time. And it had all started with a woman in a general store in Green River, Wyoming, holding a shopping list she could not read and whispering her shame to a cowboy who saw not stupidity but potential, who saw not a lost cause but a person worth saving, who offered help without judgment and love without condition. That was where it began. And though their lives eventually ended, as all lives must, what they built together never truly did. It lived on in the school, in the students, in the family, in the legend. It lived on in every person who decided to learn something new, despite being told they could not. In every person who offered help to someone struggling. In every person who chose love over fear, growth over stagnation, hope over despair. That was the legacy of Dahlia and Wyatt Olsen. And it was more enduring than granite or gold. The old-timers in Prescott still told the story on warm summer evenings, embellishing details but keeping the heart of it true. A woman who could not read, a cowboy who taught her, love that bloomed in secret lessons and brave choices, a villain who got his comeuppance, a life transformed. And in the telling, the story became a reminder that it was never too late to change, never wrong to hope, and never foolish to believe that somewhere out there was a person who would see you truly and love you completely. Because that was the other gift Wyatt had given Dahlia beyond literacy. The knowledge that she was lovable exactly as she was, that she deserved gentleness and respect and partnership. And Dahlia had given Wyatt the same gift in return, showing him that his drifting years had been leading him toward this, toward her, toward a home and family and purpose that made every hardship worthwhile. They had completed each other in the deepest sense, each filling gaps the other had not even known existed until they met. Their story ended the way all good love stories should, with two people who found each other against the odds, built something beautiful together, raised a family, served their community, and loved each other utterly until the very end. No tragedy, no separation, no regrets. Just love, pure and true and lasting. The kind that changes not just two lives, but countless others. And every woman who learned to read at the Dahlia Olsen Institute carried forward that legacy of transformation, proving over and over that there was no such thing as too stupid to learn, only too frightened or too beaten down to try. Dahlia had been the first, but she was far from the last, and in that continuation, her triumph lived forever. The desert wind still blows across Arizona, carrying the scent of sage and the memories of lives fully lived. And if you stand in the right spot at the right time, some people swear you can still hear them. A woman's voice reading aloud, confident and clear, and a man's low murmur of encouragement. Two people who found each other in the Wild West and proved that love, real love, the kind that lifts up rather than pushing down, can transform everything it touches. That was the story of Dahlia and Wyatt. And it was a good one, full of heartache and courage and triumph and love. The kind of story worth telling and retelling, worth remembering and honoring. The kind of story that proves ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they have faith in themselves and someone to believe in them. The kind of story that, once heard, changes how you see the world. And it all started because a cowboy in Wyoming decided that a woman with a shopping list deserved kindness instead of mockery, deserved help instead of judgment. That simple choice to be decent when he could have walked past set in motion a chain of events that transformed 2 lives and touched thousands more. It proved that small acts of compassion can have enormous consequences, that every person we help has the potential to go on and help others, creating cascades of positive change that spread far beyond anything we can see or measure. That was the power of literacy, yes. But more importantly, it was the power of love. Love that sees clearly and chooses kindness. Love that teaches and protects and believes. Love that refuses to accept that anyone is beyond saving or too stupid to learn or worthless. That kind of love changes everything. It always has. And because Dahlia and Wyatt chose it, chose each other, chose to believe that better was possible even when everything suggested otherwise, they got to live a love story for the ages. A story that began with shame and fear and ended with triumph and joy. A story that proved education and affection could overcome cruelty and ignorance. A story that showed the Wild West was not just about gunfights and cattle drives, but also about quiet acts of courage, about 2 people finding each other in an unforgiving landscape and choosing to be gentle with each other anyway. That was their story. That was their gift to the world. And long after the Wild West faded into history, long after the frontier closed and the modern world emerged, their love remained, a testament to what 2 people could build together when they refused to give up on each other or themselves.